London Zoo was having a bad month. On January 4, 1925, the acquisition of a 13th ostrich had led to public pressure to train one of them for police purposes, a feat supposedly accomplished some years ago on an ostrich farm in Florida, reported the Evening Post. A fortnight later, a fugitive monkey named George escaped from the zoo, bruising a naturalist's knee on his way out. To add insult to genicular injury, the zoo was under siege by requests for aid in solving crossword puzzles. What is a word in 3 letters meaning a female swan? What is a female kangaroo, or a fragile creature in 6 letters ending in 2? London Zoo, as one reporter suggested, has enough to do with the care of its own animals, and cannot act as consultant to the world at large. The poor zookeepers were at the thin end of a puzzle wedge, fated, as Ernie Bushmiller joked in his popular comic strip, to serve buckets of alphabet soup to animals prized and poached for their phonemes alone. The crossword craze of the 1920s had hit Britain like a meteorological depression, and, as was traditional, Americans were to blame. Following the publication of the first crossword in New York World by Arthur Wynne in 1913, the Tamworth Herald lamented the misfortune of a nation where 10 million people have caught the infection of unprofitable trifling, estimating the loss of productive American labor to crosswords at roughly 5 million hours per day. In the UK, so much damage had been inflicted by ham-thumbed solvers on the dictionaries of Wimbledon that all such reference works were withdrawn from public access. Thesaurus sales skyrocketed while library use crashed. By the time Vladimir Nabokov published the first Russian crossword in 1924, the Nottingham Evening Post's world at large estimation was quite right: the grid truly had run a girdle around the earth. Commentators on both sides of the Atlantic were aghast at the forfeiture of intellectual capital to a game that seemingly traded on automatic, transactional thinking. To the New York Times in 1925, crosswords were little more than a sinful waste in the utterly futile finding of words the letters of which will fit into a prearranged pattern, more or less complex. During 2018, the New York Times netted roughly $33 million from crossword products alone. In 1920s London, the Times, likewise, sneered that everywhere, at any hour of the day, people can be seen quite shamelessly poring over the checkerboard diagrams, cudgeling their brains for a word meaning idler, or whatnot. 20. Written by Johnson, edited by Jerome. Unlike bees and ants, 6. Eliot only got as far as the crossing letters, which he correctly reckoned to be DES. He had seemingly forgotten Samuel Johnson's The Idler, despite having written on Johnson throughout his career, as well as Jerome K. Jerome's The Idler, despite having been his neighbor in Marlow between 1917 to 1920, which, alongside a nod to nature's busiest workers, the classical models of illusion itself, yielded the answer. Eliot's voracious appetite for puzzles certainly seemed idling, or even addling, to many of his colleagues, who often found him smuggling the Times crossword into tedious editorial meetings under the table. Undeterred by Ezra Pound's disdain for such games as an abomination in his ABC of Reading, 1934, Eliot held the cryptic crossword in enough esteem to consider finding a reference to myself and my works in the Times crossword a crowning achievement, aspiring to a rank on the same elusive food chain in which he had chewed, without satisfaction, over Johnson and Jerome. Flummoxed by bees and ants, T.S. Eliot nevertheless wound up as a fly. In a strange misdirection of his ambition to an afterlife in the crossword, he is often abbreviated and doubled to Klutsetsi, an African insect known for transmitting insomnia. How apt that the author of The Waste Land, skewered as a maggot breeding in the corruption of poetry by F. L. Lucas in 1923, should metamorphose posthumously into a tsetse. Eliot's magnum opus may have struck Lucas as a toad, but Eliot actively embraced animal personae throughout his career, not only as the old possum behind A Book of Practical Cats, 1939, but also as a March hare in his Juvenilia, T.S. Apteryx, a kind of flightless kiwi, in his articles for The Egoist, and familiarly as the elephant amongst his co-workers. He addressed letters to Ezra Pound with Dear Rabbit, and while preparing to publish Marianne Moore's The Jerboa for Faber, wondered if pound was maybe not a rabbit at all but a gerboa a little. Animal wish I understand does illustrate the quantum theory by being at two places at once even if he don't understand it, sick. In the cryptic crosswords Eliot enjoyed, creatures could indeed behave multiplicitously, like Schrödinger's cat, or, indeed, Eliot's fondness for playing possum, animals could quantum leap between being alive or dead, vegetable or mineral, real or fictional, rabbit or jerboa. Take, for example, 10 randomly sampled clues for cat or dog from cryptics in the broadsheets of the last 50 years. 1. Leo caught both sides of argument, 3-2. Best friend rejected God, 3-3. Maybe Lion King not shown in Barrow? 3-4. Do good as a follower, 3-5. Pet fur has nothing removed, 3-6. Hound party girl initially, 3-7. A natural killer disturbed in the act, 3-8. Shadow boxer, maybe, 3-9. Being crafty, occasionally, 3-10. Perhaps Theta ultimately tried to ring, 3. Not one of these clues mentions cats or dogs, yet through the quiet conspiracy of syntactic misbehavior, all of them yield a precise answer, given in the footnotes. They are, and they aren't, animals. In a 1915 poem, Portrait of a Lady, Eliot daydreamed of being footloose from animal taxonomy, and I must borrow every changing shape to find expression. Dance, dance, like a dancing bear, cry like a parrot, chatter like an ape. The cat and dog clues exemplify the expressive opportunities licensed by letting language dance promiscuously between categories. Each clue is straitjacketed by its obligation to solubility, but the endless possibilities of wordplay supply new opportunities to wriggle free. Letters and lookalikes, collaged from idiomatic, sporting, classical, elusive, and glyphic shorthands, form unlikely alliances, aggregated from vocabularies momentarily in dialogue with one another. In his cutting review of The Waste Land, then, Lucas comment that a poem that has to be explained in notes is not unlike a picture with this is a dog inscribed beneath must have been particularly stinging to Eliot. Not only did it needle his pet preferences, Eliot was firmly team cat, but it also revealed how Lucas misunderstood the pleasure produced by both crosswords and difficult literature, as William Empson implied in a comparison between obscure puzzles and obscure poetry in The Gathering Storm. 1940. One poem in Eliot's book of practical cats seems to claw back at Lucas with its tongue-in-cheek refrain, "Again I must remind you that, a dog's a dog, a cat's a cat." Unbidden by nominative determinism, the beasts of Eliot's poetry, personae, and puzzles were under no such obligations, free to hurtle freely across arbitrary Linnean boundaries, free, as it were, to crossbreed. 24. With enough beer and bromide and borax 25 and 30. To fill a crustacean's thorax 27. Any May sheep can be 28 and 31. In a threefold degree 29. Concealed from the fangs of the lorax. The rules of the puzzle, named by the Waters of Shannon, 1934, in reference to Edward Lear's nonsense oeuvre, dictate that clues consist of one word or consecutive words in each line. Each quintet of 5 consecutive clues are formatted as a sequence of limericks. The clues are not to be taken at face value. The answers are, in this stanza, ale, paren, you, treble, and hid, masked synonymously amid the continuous verse. The solver poses as a literary critic, performing a caricature of close reading to unlock a secret. It cannot be claimed definitively that Seuss magpied Torquemada's cryptid, though, suggestively, he studied at Oxford during the peak of Torquemada's popularity, but it is intriguing that two writers in the service of silliness would invest a fictional animal with the same name. Animals have always held a certain reverence in the crossword. In the late composer Stephen Sondheim's Guide to the British Cryptic for American Readers, he caricatures quick crosswords in the Daily News and the New York Times as requiring knowledge of the Bantu hartebeest, the Congoni, an African antelope. Grids are crowded with the ASP, AFT, Eland, GNU, IBEX, Nyala, Okapi, and Zenurus, animals that have obtained a peculiar hyperreality in the public consciousness, appearing in crosswords more often than in conversation. A 1934 letter from P.G. Wodehouse even credits a crossword setter with putting the good old emu back into circulation, embalmed in the rag tag bestiary of the newsprint puzzle, where the unique character of an animal is, ultimately, subordinate to its unique, alphabetic characters. Torquemada, on the other hand, themed many of his experiments around the shapes of animals, preserving their bodies as well as their names, as Vladimir Nabokov had done in a 1926 letter to Vera, which contained a puzzle that looked like a butterfly. Only 2 years after the critic Louis Untermeyer slammed writers including T.S. Eliot and James Joyce for being part of the crossword puzzle school, Torquemada's Crosswords in Rhyme for Those of Riper Years, 1925, pioneered the verse puzzle, where every single clue is formatted as a metrically regular rhyming couplet. Each grid in Crosswords in Rhyme is designed as a kind of concrete poem, where the lattice of solutions, disparate words drawn into surprising compatibility, forms an, often animal, image. The swan begins self-referentially by telling the solver I am the crossword setter's base device, for making non-existent words suffice, anagram. Later in the grid Torquemada remixes a nursery rhyme to clue a short word. 29. As hours in days, so many merely found living tombs in me, but did not die. Knowing that merely refers to blackbirds is certainly tricky, but the sing-song cadence of the couplet brings to life its solution, pi, based on 4 and 20 blackbirds. The birds are alive, entombed inside a pie. Paradoxically, the pie is alive, entombed inside the image of a swan. The crossword apparatus, like George Steiner's archetypal poet, is constitutionally a neologist, a recombinant wordsmith. A passionate resuscitator of buried or spectral words. Bird inside pie, pie inside bird, both are encrypted, etymologically referring to burial, by the setter, and resurrected by the attention of the solver. The entangled difficulties of the cryptic crossword, then, provided a uniquely vital opportunity for defamiliarizing language, for reheating, as it were, Bushmiller's alphabet soup, and letting the animals run rampant. Whether breeding, lilacs out of the dead land, as in the waste land, or breeding bird pie fractals, the experimental aspects of literary modernism found extreme expression in cryptics, which took literature and letters alike as their raw materials. In his puzzle book, 1934, Torquemada gave us his exemplar clue I made self into poet, Masefield, a British poet whose surname recombines the letters in I made self, achieving anagrammatically the very metamorphosis trumpeted by the clue. Combinatorial, cleverly arranged letters could disclose portals into surprising realities. In this regard, Torquemada owed a great deal to the language games waged in the nonsense literature of the 19th century, which, in turn, also influenced modernist poetry, namely Eliot's more playful verse. Lewis Carroll's Doublets, ca. 1879, demanded a similarly interactive hand in making evolution come to life, turning ape into man, or fish into bird by morphological increments, as if speeding up Darwinian selection to the pace of handwriting. If, as Eliot put it, nonsense literature employed a parody of sense rather than a vacuity of sense, then Torquemada took this sideways slant to its fullest extent. In the bat, he apes Carroll, what he was me, that black thing in the middle. A hatter once confessed to be a riddle. The solution, as Torquemada explains, refers to the Mad Hatter asking Twinkle, Twinkle, little bat, how I wonder what you're at in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, 1865, with that black thing in the middle singling out the zoomorphic, batty cavity in the heart of the grid itself.